You're not really reading that book, are you? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. And that's right, I'm doing another tag today. This is the Snob-o-Meter tag, and I've already seen a bunch of people do this tag. It was first created by Isaiah, that reading guy, and I was tagged by John and Must Read More, so I will link to both of their videos down in the description. And I've seen a bunch of people do this. I thought it was fun. I think most of my answers are probably going to be something you already expect, but you know what? I thought I'd throw together a video anyway, so let's see how it goes. This tag has 11 prompts along with a tags and people prompt. So let's get going. First one, what is your definition of book snobbery? So, for me, what I think, snobbery in general, not just book snobbery, but it's not simply having a passionate belief about one thing being better than another, but there's a value judgment that has to go along with that. So, for instance, if I say horror is the best genre of books, I don't believe that, but let's say I did. Horror is the best genre. I don't think that makes you a book snob. I think you have to go the extra step of saying horror is the best genre, and because you don't read it and I do, I'm a better reader than you, or something to that extent. So snobbery, I think, involves some sort of value judgment, right? Some sort of sense of superiority that you base upon whatever your preferences are or your passions may be. So that's kind of what I think of as book snobbery. The belief that since you're reading certain books and I'm reading different type of books, that makes me either a better reader or a better person than you. I will say though, the idea of being a snob or snobbery and being really dedicated to your passions, sometimes snobs are just jerks. Like that's, the way it is. But sometimes it is a defense mechanism, right? It is an attempt to cover up a sense of insecurity. So, an example, not with books, but when I was young, when I was in elementary school, so in America, elementary school is from grade K through grade 6. I was in a very small elementary school, only had about 220 kids, I think, in all 7 of those grades. And even at that young age, I knew I was different than everyone else. I didn't fit in. I was often the smartest kid in the class. I didn't really have any friends. There wasn't any kind of like classic bully or any situation like that, but I just didn't fit in. I wasn't part of the cool crowd, whatever that may be for elementary school kids. And I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't the same as everyone else. And when I was that young, I don't know if I had the language to understand what it meant to be queer. I really wasn't until maybe 7th or 8th grade that I developed that kind of specific understanding. But even in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, I knew I was different. And one of the ways, at least, that manifested was, at that time, this is the early 90s, everyone, or late 80s, early 90s, everyone in my area was listening to the same music, which was hip hop and R&B and rap. And so I made the conscious decision saying, since I'm not like everyone else, I'm not going to listen to that music. And I actively chose to go in the exact opposite direction. And I listened to whatever kind of rock I could get my hands on, from pop punk to death metal and everything in between. And I defined myself as being different from everyone else by the music that I embraced. And now I wasn't a snob, especially not at that young age, but I definitely held myself in a different way because I said, look, I am different than you, and I'm using this external marker to show that I am different than you. And what that did for me is it allowed me to set up these defenses. It allowed me to create a position where I was grabbing onto my difference and I was grabbing onto my isolation in a way so it couldn't be weaponized against me. Right? So that was a defense mechanism that had to do with my own insecurity. I will say these days I listen to all types of music. I should just put that out there. Literally all types of music. Let's say last week alone, Lady Gaga released a new album, and I've spent a good amount of time listening to that. And Whitechapel, which is this deathcore band, also released a new album, and I spent a good amount of time listening to that. So I listen to all different genres of music these days, just to clarify that. My point being is that I don't think snobbery is always just people being jerks. I think sometimes when people are snobs, it is because they are afraid of something, that their snobbery is a defense mechanism to compensate for their own sense of inferiority or their own insecurity in some way. So, yes, snobbery means a sense of superiority, right? I am better than you because of this random external factor. But I think often that comes from a sense of either self-loathing or insecurity or fear in general. So, okay, I spent way too long on the first question. Let's just keep going. 2. Is there a genre or type of book that you would never consider reading, such as, would you ever read a romance, Or if you regularly read romance, would you ever try a science fiction novel? And so on. No, I read all types of genres. There is no genre that I would not read. Now there are genres that I don't prefer to read, and considering how, deep my TBR is, I probably won't go to them unless I have a reason for it. So if I'm intentionally kind of pushing my boundaries and going into uncomfortable areas to try to expand my horizon, or if there are particular books that come heavily recommended by friends or people whose opinions I respect, then for those reasons, I might go into a genre I don't normally go into. So there are definitely preferences, but there's no genre that I wouldn't read, and there's no genre that I haven't read. So yeah, I think that's how that goes. 3. Does erotica count as literature? That's literature. That's what do you mean by literature? So literature, I suppose, right, isn't just something that's written down. If we're making some distinction, then literature must be some sort of writing that has some sort of artistic merit, or let's say cultural or social merit, maybe philosophical merit. So it has some sort of value inherent to it or superimposed upon it that is more than just the writing itself. And yeah, sure, why not? I think anything can count as literature, as having artistic value or artistic merit. I don't think it's limited to any specific genre or any genre is excluded. I think it's the quality of the writing and how it exists in a cultural space is what gives it artistic merit. So definitely erotica can have artistic merit, and therefore erotica can be literature. And quote unquote literary fiction can also not be literature because it can be garbage. Those are both possibilities. So I think the idea of being literature means there's some sort of artistic merit, cultural merit, philosophical or intellectual or social merit that is either inherent or imposed upon a work of art, and or in this case writing, and that's definitely possible with any genre of writing, including erotica. 4. Is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? No, of course not. I mean, I think reading anything is phenomenal. And so, yeah, that's the most important. You could argue reasons for both, right? Conceptually, books that have been widely accepted to be in the classical canon have stood the test of time to some extent. So, reading them, you can trust there's something about either the themes or the writing itself that has some sort of value proposition that many people have recognized and have celebrated over some great course of time. And therefore, you have a higher kind of hit ratio or a better percentage of getting something meaningful from that book conceptually, right? That's the whole idea of classics. And whereas with bestsellers, popular bestsellers, they might be classics in waiting, like that's possible, but also a lot of times contemporary bestsellers have more to do with the culture and with the current social and political climate than they do about the books themselves. And so therefore, something being a bestseller isn't necessarily a comment on the quality of the writing or on the book itself. So there's no guarantee that just because something is popular and selling really well, that it is going to be quote unquote of quality. However, on the flip side, reading can be a social activity for people. And the idea of being part of the zeitgeist, reading something when tens of thousands of other people are reading it, and therefore being part of something bigger than yourself, I think is one reason that many people read. And that's a very valid reason to read. So if reading a popular bestseller, which allows you to align yourself with the zeitgeist to become part of the current conversation that's happening, I think that's also really meaningful for people, regardless of the quality of the book itself, right? The book could be, a hot mess and not any good, but if hundreds of thousands of people are reading it, and so therefore you get to read it and have an opinion on it and be part of that conversation, that might be more meaningful to you than the book itself being quote unquote of good quality, right? So I don't think it's better to read classics or popular bestsellers, one or the other. I think it depends on what you're hoping to get out of your reading. And then as a result of that, you might find yourself more attracted in one direction or the other. But one isn't better than the other. Number 5, have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? No. I can't think of any, I have no doubt that in my life there are many times I have tried to impress my intelligence upon others and done something to show off. I have no doubt about that. I can never imagine a scenario where I would, say, oh, I read such and such a book and have people think me intelligent because of that. None of the circles that I ever traveled in would ever find that impressive, regardless of what the book might be. So no, I can very easily and honestly say I have never bragged about reading a classic or any book for that matter in an attempt to sound smart or to, fool someone into thinking I have some sort of intelligence that I don't have. Definitely has not happened. 6. Do audiobooks count as reading? What about comic books or graphic novels? Yeah, of course they do. I like the current language that says you can read with your eyes or read with your ears. I think that language and that framing is really useful. And I don't think there is a substantial difference between reading audiobooks or reading print books. And I am of the firm belief that language is malleable and it needs to meet the needs of the people speaking it. And therefore, I don't think we need new language. I definitely think you read audiobooks, not in the same way as you read print books, but you read them both. And the difference is what, sensory organ you use to engage in that act of reading. And, the way your brain processes that information is different. I think they're both perfectly valid acts of reading. And with graphic novels or comic books, also definitely reading. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, oh yeah, reading graphic novels is definitely reading, especially because it then is a stepping stone into reading non-graphic novels. And you could tell they want to say real books, but then they catch themselves to the last minute. I don't think that's the case. I think graphic novels are good and are legitimate reading because they are legitimate reading. Whether or not they're a stepping stone to, print books and non-graphic novels or not, I think they're valid reading. So I don't think there's any qualifications needed. Yes, comic books, graphic novels, definitely types of reading. 7. Have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book, a book with little substance to it? For example, a self-help book or a celebrity memoir. I like to think that I don't look down on anyone for anything. Like, who am I to look down on anyone for anything? Definitely not by their reading habits. So, no, I've never looked down on someone for what they've read. Now, I will say, if we're being honest, that there have been times when people are reading certain books, especially self-help books. I find the vast majority of self-help books, at least to my skeptical mind, I experience them as very little more than crass, like, money grabs. And they are participating in this kind of larger ecosystem of spiritual consumerism that aren't actually addressing important issues to help people have more meaningful lives, but they are just, magpieing different shiny objects and putting them together without really understanding context and without doing anything meaningful. That's my kind of skeptical impression of a lot of contemporary self-help. So I don't have a lot of fondness for it. And when I see certain people reading it, people that I know, I might be curious as to why they would read it, right? How they can find that beneficial or useful. So there may be some level of curiosity there or surprise, but that doesn't ever transfer or transform into me thinking poorly of them or thinking I'm superior to them because of that reading choice. So there may be some shock, there may be some confusion, but that's not the same thing, right, as looking down on someone. Number 8, have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? Not that I know of, but I don't doubt that I have. I have a lot of pretty basic and, coarse delights. So to my face, I don't think anyone has ever expressed anything that I would say is book snobbery, but I don't doubt that it exists and that people judge me all the time for it. And you know what? That's okay. Good for them. It does not affect me in any meaningful way. 9, would you ever be friends with a snob? Maybe you already are. Yeah, sure. I'm sure I am. I think that line between being very passionate about something and being a snob is a very thin one for some people. And it's easy to cross sometimes. And as long as someone is able to, for the most part, do their best to be a good person, then I'm going to be friends with them, even if there are things about them where maybe they are snobbish about certain things. Like I said, it's a thin line. For instance, when I was younger, before I became a monk, I really enjoyed beer. And I brewed my own beer for almost a decade. I started when I was 18, and I was brewing my own beer up until, the year before I ordained. And I really enjoyed craft beers and artisan beer to the extent where, at least through grad school, I probably drank a beer every day. Very rarely more than one. I don't enjoy the experience of being drunk or even tipsy, but I do enjoy the craft and the quality and the science and the, possibilities that come with artisan beer and craft beer. So I really, really enjoyed it. And from that, up until this day, I haven't touched alcohol for 15 years. But even to this day, when I see someone drinking beer, out of a bottle or out of a can, it just hurts my heart a little bit because you're never supposed to drink beer out of a can or a bottle. Cans and bottles are delivery vehicles for beer. It should always be poured into a glass, preferably a wide rim glass, like a pint style glass. Though in America, beers are usually 12 ounces, so you don't want a full pint glass, but that style glass, because having that wide open rim allows for all the volatile aromatics to be released, and therefore the drinking experience is totally transformed because the aromatics and what you're smelling modifies and affects what you taste, right? Because since these two senses work together. So drinking something out of a can or out of a bottle is like literally shutting off half of your sensory input for whatever you're consuming. And so even now, I wouldn't say I'm a snob about it, but I definitely would, say that I cringe a little bit when I see, especially people buy expensive product and then they don't make the best use of it. There's like a cringe factor there. And similar with coffee. So now that I stopped drinking alcohol, I, am dedicated to coffee, and I drink specialty coffee that is almost always, single origin grown, specialty roasted, often very light roasts, exploring very floral and fruity and, all different flavors, right, in my coffee. And one of the last times I was home, I was at my mother's house when I was taking care of my mom, and my sister came over, and I had a really nice coffee that I bought from a local roastery. And I offered to make my sister a cup of coffee, and so I made her one. And I knew she was just going to fill it with milk and sugar. And all of these beautiful floral notes and this really delicate flavor to this delicious coffee were going to be like drowned out in just milk and sugar taste. And so I said, look, before you adulterate this delicious cup of coffee, please just take a sip of it. Just enjoy a little bit of it as it was meant to be enjoyed. And my sister, my long-suffering sister, was like, fine, okay. And she takes a sip and she goes, yeah, no, no, no. And then went the cream and in went the sugar, and a little part of me died. But at the same time, whenever I go to the US, you have to remember, I am a New England boy, born and bred. And that means whenever I go to the US, regardless of what season it is, the very first thing I do is go to the Dunkin' Donuts that's in the airport and buy a large iced coffee. Even though I have very strong passion about coffee, I also can't get past the nostalgia of Dunkin' Donuts and the coffee I grew up on. So I think I'm safely not in snob territory, right? But my point is, passion about something can become snobbery very, very quickly. It's a very thin line, So it's important we always watch ourselves. I think part of the reason is we spend so much time defining ourselves based upon our habits and about the things we like. And that's because we don't truly understand who we are. We don't know ourselves very well. So therefore, I define myself by these things I accumulate around me. And therefore, if I have defined myself by loving horror fiction or by loving a certain type of music or by being a coffee aficionado, and then you threaten any of those things, I take it as if you're threatening me because I have conflated my sense of identity, my sense of self, with this random external phenomena, this ephemera that doesn't really mean anything. But these days, I don't know if it's just these days, but it feels like these days especially, we don't do the type of introspective work that allow us to understand who we are and how we are in the world. And it's easier to grab all these external nonsense and then associate our sense of self with that external stuff, right? And therefore, we're feeling like we're constantly under threat or under attack. And I think, again, as I said in the very beginning, snobbery is like a type of defense against that sometimes. So I don't know. Okay, moving on. Number 10. Are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? No, of course not. What do we mean by sophisticated? I suppose by sophisticated, we mean people who have some sort of like broad understanding or broad experiences, right? That aren't, single focused on things, usually are very worldly, have a wide breadth of experience. And that can come through reading, certainly, but that's not the only way you can be sophisticated. Never mind all the people that just don't have access to reading. When I was a kid, I grew up with a single mom who was working literally 100 hours a week, 6 or 7 days a week. Like, when could she read? Like, when did she have access to reading? It was impossible. Never mind, depending on your income, depending on disability, depending on all other sorts of things, the idea that you need to have reading as a way to develop a wide understanding of the world is, I think, very, small-minded in and of itself. So no, I don't think that you have to read to be sophisticated. I also don't think there is any strong value that needs to be associated with being sophisticated or not being sophisticated, right? Depending on what we mean by sophistication. But if we mean this general idea that you have a broad understanding of a wider range of topics or worldly experiences, why is there a value judgment to that? Why is that better than not? Obviously, I think having a taking a big picture view of things, right, and trying to be well versed in many different things is useful, or it can be, but I don't think you need to have a value judgment associated with it. So no, I don't think it's the case that people who don't read are less sophisticated than people that do. I think there are many different ways to arrive at a level of sophistication if that is something you're interested in arriving at. And number 11, measure yourself based on your answers to the previous 10 questions. Would you qualify as a book snob? I don't think so. I certainly hope not. I don't think myself better than anyone for any reason, really, especially not what you read. If you are enjoying whatever you read in whatever way you're reading it, I think that's wonderful. Even if it's something that I will never ever read in my life, if you're enjoying it, then that's great. So no, I do not think I'm a book snob. Okay, lastly, number 12, tag some people. I've already seen a lot of my friends tagged already. So if you're watching this, then you are 100% tagged. I would love to hear any of your responses or your thoughts about snobbery down in the comments below. I will tag some specific people, but when I post this, I'll see who's already made videos and try to tag people who haven't. So those will be tagged down in the description. Other than that, I think that's all I've got. I'd love to hear your thoughts about any of this, okay? So please share down in the comments. For now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.